My parents always put me down and labeled me the family's black sheep, so I moved out to make my own path. But years later, when I showed up at my granddad's 80th birthday party, my parents ridiculed me and tried to show me the door, saying, "People can't know you're still a failure." On my way out, I make this announcement and now my parents are quickly regretting. Growing up, I always felt overshadowed by my older brother, Mark. He was everything our parents seemed to value: academically gifted, disciplined, and consistently earning perfect grades. Mark had a natural focus and drive that made him seem almost flawless in their eyes. Meanwhile, I was the opposite in so many ways. I struggled to focus on school, procrastinated on everything until the very last minute, and was constantly forgetful. It wasn't just academics either. These challenges spilled into every other area of my life, leaving me feeling like I could never measure up. I didn't understand why I was the way I was. And, honestly, I just thought I was lazy or incapable. It wasn't until much later in life that everything finally clicked for me. I had ADHD. The diagnosis was a revelation. Suddenly, all the struggles and frustrations from my childhood made sense. Every symptom I'd wrestled with, from my inability to concentrate to my chronic procrastination, fit perfectly into the ADHD framework. With the help of medication and other tools, I've been able to turn my life around and approach things with a sense of control I never knew was possible. But back then as a child, there was no diagnosis, no understanding, and no support. All my parents saw were my shortcomings. For context, my parents are both incredibly accomplished individuals. They're high-achieving academics, widely respected in their fields, and they hold prestigious positions at work. Naturally, they expected the same level of excellence from their children. They wanted Mark and me to be the most successful people in any room. Mark, of course, lived up to those expectations effortlessly. I, however, was the troublesome child. In their eyes, I wasn't working hard enough, wasn't disciplined enough, and wasn't good enough. They frequently compared me to Mark, their golden child, which only deepened the divide between me and my brother. Those comparisons hurt more than they likely realized, making me feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with me just because I was different from him. Mark didn't make my childhood any easier either because we studied at the same school. It often felt like I could never escape his shadow or his judgment. If I didn't finish my assignments on time or got into any kind of trouble at school, he would yell at me. He'd go on and on about how embarrassed he was to have a loser sibling like me. Those words cut deep, especially when they came from someone I was supposed to look up to. At home, Mark would tattle on me to our parents for the smallest things like hanging out with my friends instead of studying. He was constantly looking for ways to prove to our parents that he was the better child. I think part of it stemmed from the fact that unlike me, Mark didn't have any friends. He was a classic know-it-all, always acting superior to everyone else and ready to pounce on anyone who made the slightest mistake. Unsurprisingly, people didn't like him. He isolated himself, and instead of being introspective about why, he doubled down on his condescending attitude. Despite his flaws, my parents absolutely adored him. They never once called him out for his behavior or encouraged him to be kinder or more humble. Instead, they celebrated him as if he could do no wrong. They bragged about Mark constantly at family gatherings, at work, to neighbors, to anyone who would listen. Every year, they threw these extravagant birthday parties for him, complete with fancy decorations, guests, and expensive gifts. They made it clear they felt Mark deserved to be celebrated because, in their words, he was the one good thing to come out of their marriage. Can you even imagine hearing your parents say that about your sibling as if you're nothing in comparison? Meanwhile, my birthdays were almost an afterthought. There were no parties, no excitement. Every year, I received the same predictable gift, books. And not the fun imaginative kind of books that kids might actually enjoy. They were always educational books, the kind that screamed, "You need to work harder." When my brother graduated from college, it was a monumental moment for my family. He got into one of the top universities in the country and my parents were absolutely over the moon. They couldn't stop talking about his achievements, boasting to anyone who would listen about how proud they were of him. 2 years later, when it was my turn to graduate, the situation couldn't have been more different. I didn't get into a prestigious university like Mark. Instead, I got accepted into an average university compared to his, one that didn't hold the same weight or prestige in the eyes of my parents. Their disappointment was palpable. My dad didn't even try to hide it. He told me outright that he had no hopes for me anymore. He said he just wanted me to be gone from their lives because he was too embarrassed to even tell our relatives where I was going to college. Those words crushed me. To hear your own father essentially disown you all because you didn't live up to the same unrealistic standard is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. My parents called me the black sheep of the family, saying they regretted having me and that raising me had been a waste of their time and resources. Mark also made it clear that he felt disgusted by the idea of me attending the college I had chosen. He told me that even though he didn't expect me to reach his level of academic excellence, I should have at least tried harder. His words stung. To them, my best was never good enough. I was so hurt by their words and their attitude. I made the decision then and there. If they truly felt this way about me, If they genuinely believed I wasn't worth their time or love, then I would do them a favor and cut them off. I wasn't going to stay in an environment that only tore me down. I promised myself that I would carve out my own path no matter how hard it might be and that I wouldn't look back. Going to college was a whole new chapter for me, but it came with its own challenges. I had to take out an education loan just to afford it, and I also picked up a part-time job to support myself. Balancing work, studies, and managing my ADHD was incredibly difficult. There were moments when I felt like giving up, but I didn't. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who believed in me, friends who were supportive and encouraging, who saw my potential instead of my flaws. With their help and the right medication to manage my ADHD, I started to build a life that felt meaningful and fulfilling. Today, I'm an AI solutions architect working at a top multinational corporation. For the past 9 years, I've had zero contact with my parents or my brother, nor have I kept any tabs on their lives. I have worked hard to distance myself from that part of my life because it brought me nothing but pain. I usually avoid family events altogether to steer clear of any chance encounters with my parents or Mark. However, this time was my granddad's 80th birthday party. He personally called and begged me to come. I had not seen him in such a long time. He's one of the few people in the family who's always shown me kindness, and I couldn't bear the guilt of disappointing him on such a milestone occasion. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. When I arrived at the party, I noticed that my parents were already there. I had expected this, of course, but seeing them in person after so many years still stirred up old emotions. I wasn't entirely prepared for. Despite what I felt, I reminded myself why I was there. This was about my granddad's birthday. I went to greet my granddad discreetly and gave him a hug and spent the rest of the time saying hello to everybody else, exchanging polite words and smiles with family members who were genuinely surprised and happy to see me. Many of them hadn't seen me in nearly a decade, so they were excited to catch up. But then my parents spotted me. I caught the look on their faces, stunned as if they couldn't believe I was standing there. Almost immediately, my mom approached me, her expression unreadable, and asked me if she could have a word with me privately. I nodded. So she then guided me away from the rest of the party, leading us to a more private corner of the venue away from the wandering eyes of the guests. From the very start of the conversation, my parents made it crystal clear that they weren't happy to see me. There was no attempt at pleasantries or even the faintest hint of reconciliation. My mom's first question was blunt and cold. "What are you doing here?" I calmly explained that I had come at my granddad's request and that he had personally asked me to attend his 80th birthday celebration, and I just couldn't ignore him. My dad wasn't satisfied with this explanation. He immediately wanted to know why I had never bothered to attend any of my granddad's previous birthday parties or other family events for that matter, yet had suddenly decided to show up now. Dad taunted me, questioning if coming here for granddad was just an excuse. He asked if I had finally come to my senses and if I was looking for an opportunity to reconnect with them after all these years. His words infuriated me, but I kept my composure. I told them firmly and clearly that I did not want to reconnect with them in any way. It's not like I needed their permission to attend my own granddad's party. If they hated my presence here so much, they could simply go back to ignoring me and leave me alone to mingle with others. However, Dad argued that they wished they could ignore me but that people would then start asking questions to them. He told me that I should have at least given them a heads up so they could have been better prepared to answer questions about me. Honestly, he was acting like I had committed a crime or something. I told him that if anyone asked, they could simply tell them that I was doing very well in life, that I had built a successful career and a very supportive partner. Hearing this, my mom scoffed and said, "Do you honestly expect us to believe that you have a successful career? You didn't even graduate from a decent college, for goodness sake." I felt a rush of anger building inside me. I had built my career from the ground up, overcoming so many obstacles, and yet here she was, dismissing everything I'd achieved with a single sentence. Before I could argue with her, my mom pointed to the door and coldly said, "You should leave. People can't know you're still a failure." I was stunned. Who did they think they were to ask me to leave a party that wasn't even about them? How could they still treat me like this? They were so obsessed with protecting their image and acting holier than thou in front of others. Their hurtful, dismissive words made me realize that they still thought I was the same child they could just control. However, I wasn't the same person anymore. If they were so worried about what people might say, I decided I was going to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. Without a second thought, I pushed past them and walked back to where the rest of the guests were gathered. My granddad noticed immediately that something was off with me and came over to check on me. I didn't hold back. I told him everything. I told him what my parents had said to me, how they tried to kick me out, and how they were still so ashamed of me that they didn't want anyone to know I was even here. Hearing this, my granddad was livid. He assured me that my parents had no right to treat me that way, let alone try to ruin his birthday by causing such drama. He said he'd speak to them on my behalf, but I told him it wouldn't make a difference. What we needed to do was bring the truth to light publicly. Luckily, my granddad agreed with me, so I then raised my glass and gently clinked it to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, steadied my voice, and started by congratulating my granddad on reaching such an incredible milestone. I thanked him for inviting me and said how much it meant to be there celebrating with him. And then I shifted gears, and I told everyone how nice it was to see so many family members again after so many years. But I also explained why I hadn't been a part of these celebrations for nearly a decade. I'm sure many of you are wondering why I had never shown up to any family event over the years, so I'm going to tell you the truth. It was because of my parents. The truth is my parents have always treated me like I was beneath them, making me feel like I was nothing more than a burden to them over the years. I laid it all out. I told them how my parents had ostracized me and made me feel like I wasn't good enough and how they had labeled me a failure all my life simply because I hadn't lived up to their impossible expectations. I shared how I had paid my own way through college by taking out loans and working part-time jobs without any support from my parents. I made it clear that while I had worked hard to build a life for myself, they had not once reached out to check on me. The room was dead silent as I spoke. Some people exchanged uncomfortable glances while others stared at my parents who looked absolutely mortified. My dad's face was white as I was talking while my mom looked furious. I didn't just stop there. I shared how throughout my entire childhood, my parents had favored Mark, showering him with love, attention, and opportunities while labeling me the black sheep of the family. I explained how their constant comparisons and harsh treatment had alienated me, how they dismissed my struggles with ADHD as laziness, and how they never once tried to understand or support me. I went on to say that now that I was an adult, successful in my own right, I had no expectation that my parents would suddenly embrace me. However, I certainly didn't anticipate that they would go so far as to scold me for attending my own granddad's birthday party, a party I was invited to by the guest of honor himself. It was absurd and hurtful, and I wanted everyone to know just how ridiculous their behavior was. So for all those years when I wasn't at family events, I wasn't being rude or distant. I was protecting myself. I was trying to heal from years of emotional wounds. However, today, when I showed up here for the sake of my granddad, my parents wanted to kick me out. They keep saying that they don't want to answer any questions about me as it makes them feel ashamed about who I am. So this is why I wanted to address this here in front of all of you for once and for all. I'm done hiding. I'm done allowing them to make me feel like I'm the problem. From now on, I'll be attending every family event regardless of whether my parents like it or not. As I finished my speech, my granddad and some of my cousins started to cheer me on. They then came over to give me a hug, showing their support. My parents, on the other hand, seemed frozen in place, unable to come up with any defense for their actions now that the truth was in the open. For so long, they had controlled the narrative, but now everyone could see the reality of who they were and how they had treated me. After that, my parents quickly left, clearly embarrassed, while I stayed behind enjoying the rest of the party by spending time with my cousins and other close relatives. In the days that followed this incident, several relatives had reached out to me, expressing their support and commending me for speaking my truth. Some said it took real courage for me to stand up for myself and call out the unfair treatment I had endured from my parents for so long. A few have even apologized for not recognizing what I had gone through earlier or for not reaching out to me sooner. However, not everyone agrees with how I handled the situation. A handful of relatives feel that I should have kept the matter private, arguing that I went a bit too far by exposing my parents publicly and humiliating them in front of the entire family. So, Reddit, Ida? Update 1. I must say all of your comments have been incredibly kind. I'm genuinely overwhelmed by how many people have reached out to check on my well-being. For everyone asking, I'm doing okay mentally. All throughout my childhood, I became accustomed to my parents treating me like trash. It was painful, and I carried that hurt for so long, but as I've grown, I've learned to stand up for myself. The moment at the party was a culmination of years of pent-up emotions and truths I had suppressed, and honestly, I'm glad I spoke out. I have no regrets about defending myself and finally letting the family know my side of the story. For those of you wondering about where Mark was during the party, he wasn't there. According to one of my cousins, he was on a work trip, which explains why I didn't run into him. And honestly, I'm relieved. If he had been there, he would have likely jumped on my parents' bandwagon and said something nasty to me also. After all, Mark is always quick to criticize and demean me, so his absence was, in a way, a small mercy. Some of you have asked why, during those tough times, I didn't seek financial help from other family members when my parents refused to support me. The truth is, back then, I was young, naive, and easily swayed by their words. When my parents and Mark mocked and insulted me, calling me a failure, belittling my college, and questioning my dreams, I felt deeply ashamed. The thought of airing our dirty laundry to others back then and potentially facing more rejection was mortifying to me. I was also proud, so I made up my mind to handle everything on my own, no matter how difficult it was. When it comes to my granddad, I need to emphasize that he has always been supportive of me in his own way. Financially, he hasn't been very stable, so I couldn't have relied on him to help with my college expenses. However, his emotional support has been invaluable, and he's always believed in me and understood the dynamics between me and my parents. He knows the whole story, every bit of it, and he's never judged me for cutting ties with my parents. In fact, I'm deeply grateful to him for giving me the opportunity to speak at his party and for standing by me when I decided to expose my parents for who they truly are. Anyway, since that moment at the party, I've heard from multiple relatives that my parents are facing serious backlash from people who were horrified to learn how cruel they had been to me. Many of these relatives had no idea about the extent of their behavior because my parents had always gone around painting me as the problem child. Clearly, they have created this narrative to protect their own image while sweeping their toxicity under the rug. Now that the truth is out, it seems their facade is finally starting to crumble. I can only hope that this public embarrassment will serve as a wake-up call for them. Maybe, just maybe, they'll reflect on their actions and come to their senses. But even if they don't, I've said my piece and I feel a sense of closure. Update 2. So Mark reached out to me this week. He heard from our parents and relatives about what happened during the party, so he called me. As soon as I picked up the phone, he started yelling at me, furious about what had happened. He said he couldn't believe that I had the audacity to expose our parents publicly. He claimed that I was only doing this to cause drama and that my actions were selfish. According to him, I had no right to air our family's dirty laundry in front of everyone, especially when my parents had spent years trying to move on and live their lives without me. He kept going on about how I was ruining the fragile peace that had been established and that I should just let it go and move on instead of dredging up the past. He asked me, "What do you want from them? An apology? Really? For what? Just because they didn't pay for your college fees? You want an apology because they were disappointed in you? An apology because they always pushed you to be better? An apology because they wanted the best for you?" I couldn't help but scoff at him. Mark had always been the one to side with our parents, no matter how badly they treated me. He never understood the hurt I had gone through, always brushing it off as family drama. It was easier for him to pretend everything was fine than to face the truth. I pointed out to him that pushing someone to be better doesn't mean humiliating them or mocking them for years when they don't meet one's expectations. What I needed from our parents wasn't just more pressure, it was support, love, and understanding. I told him how much I wished they had been the kind of parents who saw me for who I was and helped me navigate my challenges rather than berating me for falling short of their impossible standards. I never asked them to give me a perfect childhood, but I just wanted parents who had my back and understood me, not ones who saw me as a disappointment. Mark argued that if I really felt this way, I could have sorted out my feelings with them privately instead of exposing them publicly. He said that our parents had worked for years to build a certain image and now all their accomplishments seemed meaningless because all anyone was talking about was how awful they were for abandoning me all those years ago. He asked if it had really been worth it, suggesting that I was just bitter because they were right all along and implying that maybe I hadn't accomplished anything in my life, which is why I was coming after our parents after so long. I just laughed at his words and calmly told him that despite all the terrible things our parents and he had put me through, I had built a successful career. The reason I had exposed our parents had nothing to do with my accomplishments. It was about finally taking control of my own narrative after years of being silenced and dismissed. I had been cast aside and treated like I was the problem. But the truth was, I had been the one who had been wronged. So exposing them wasn't about showing off how far I've come or making them look bad. It was about standing up for myself, about letting people know what had really been happening behind closed doors. Mark didn't back down and continued to argue with me that I needed to issue a public apology for the sake of our parents' reputation, but I cut him off. I told him bluntly that I would never do something like that. Why would I apologize to them when I am the victim? I told Mark that he needed to get his head out of the hole he had buried it in and stop defending people who had treated me like trash for my entire life. Just to frustrate my brother even more, I told him that from now on, I would be attending every single family event no matter how much it bothered him or our parents. If they dared to confront me again, I would keep exposing them. Why should I let their toxic behavior control my connections with the rest of the family? I had every right to see my relatives and to form connections with my family members. My brother claimed I was only doing this to make our parents' lives miserable and demanded that I go back to not being in contact with anyone just like I had during all these years. I sighed in exasperation. Clearly, Mark and I weren't going to see eye to eye. So I told him to stay in his lane from that point forward and to mind his own business. I wasn't going to tolerate any more of his attempts to defend our parents or make excuses for their behavior. I then ended our conversation and blocked his number. After all, I didn't owe him anything anymore. No explanations. No apologies. Update 3. I just wanted to quickly update a few things that have happened in the last 4 months. To begin with, I've made a conscious effort to be more involved in my family life. I make it a point to attend all our family gatherings, whether they're big events like birthdays or anniversaries or even smaller casual get-togethers. Beyond that, I've also been spending more time with my granddad, making sure to visit him regularly and check in on how he's doing. Additionally, I've been hanging out with my cousins more often. Whenever we come up with plans, whether it's just grabbing food, watching a movie, or spending time together doing something fun, I make it a priority to join in. It's been great to strengthen those bonds and create new memories with them. Last month, my dad apologized to me after all this time. It was a big moment for me. Since both my dad and mom were blocked on my phone, He reached out via email. He shared that he had been going to therapy and spending a lot of time reflecting on the past. He admitted that he and my mom had, in some ways, favored my brother over me and tried to justify it by saying that because he and mom grew up in strict academically focused families, they had always expected me and Mark to meet the same high standards. He went on to say that after I had spoken up for myself during my granddad's party and revealed that I had ADHD, it was a turning point for him. He admitted to doing his own research afterward and came to realize that I really did have ADHD. He confessed to feeling guilty for not recognizing the signs earlier and for failing to support me as a child when I needed it most. In the email, he also wrote how he had been quietly following my career over the past few months through LinkedIn. He said he was really proud of the things I've accomplished. He also mentioned my mom at the end of the message. While he said she's aware of my achievements too, he acknowledged that she's a very proud woman and will probably need a little bit of time before she's ready to come around and offer her own apology. Honestly, I'm still shocked that my dad wrote all of that to me. If only he had been this understanding while I was growing up, my childhood could have been so much different. That said, despite his email, I haven't unblocked him or my mom. I'm still not ready to forgive them.